Hi, welcome to this week's edition of More Insights and Strategy Game Time Tech Podcast. I am Melody Brue, and I'm joined this week by my co-host, Robert Kramer, and we have a special guest this week, Jason Andersen. We are all actually vice presidents and principal analysts of different verticals, but we all are here to talk about sports today, specifically NFL. And before we get started, little disclaimer, this show is for information and entertainment purposes only. While we will discuss publicly traded companies, its contents should not be taken as investment advice. So let's get started. So topic number one, AWS. You two were just in Seattle with AWS for analyst event and a football game. Having a little FOMO, have to admit. I was actually at a different event. I was at a very cool event in San Jose with Zoom, but you guys kind of got, I think maybe got the good end of the stick. But tell me about it.
I mean, I thought it was a great time. It's always fun when you go to these events to meet people, but also to see the game, but how the game's using technology. And so, Jason and I got to, see it firsthand, which I thought was fantastic. We met AWS's global head of sports, Julie Souza, who was actually in the booth, and she talked a little bit to us about they just I think it was a multi-year partnership with the Seahawks. They just did an extension with Amazon. They're already using Amazon Web Services for a lot of the data analytics, the performance, things of that nature that helps them with the drafts. And we can talk about that in just a minute. But this deal is going to take in consideration using Bedrock, which is their AI powered system to automate content. I think, Jason, maybe you can talk about a little bit more, but to actually take that content and use it for broadcast, for fans, for social media, in a manner that's expedited in different languages. But we had a really good time, and we got to see a few other technologies that we can talk about in just a second.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. The first is it was a nice event from an analyst perspective because we got a preview of what's coming down the road at reInvent, which is in December. It's not always typical for analyst days to be so far in advance of an event. So it was cool because we were able to give some of our feedback, but it's kind of not cool because I can't tell you about a lot of the cool stuff we learned technologically. So go to reInvent, I guess, which is the message. But one of the cases they did talk about with the Seahawks, which was super interesting, was how they have to distribute so much content so quickly after a game. It's from a press conference to hype videos to all these different types of content. And what they've recently done is injected AI into that process. So they started out with a really manual process in the beginning, which sounded like an incredibly stressful job for the people who did it. And then they've begun to, over the years, start to use Amazon technologies to simplify that. And the last step has been adding, as Robert mentioned, Bedrock, their kind of AI front end, if you will, or mid plane, if you will, to large language models. And it's pretty cool. It's a very cool use case in terms of how it's able to take all of these disparate sources of content, format them correctly, make sure they're consumable by whatever platform they're pushing that content out to, but also delivers summaries and transcripts and translations to that stuff, which is also a big part of the process, which are all things that Gen AI is great for. So it seems to be like a really good usage. And I think it's also cool that they've kind of now layered that on top of a process. I think so many people think of artificial intelligence as kind of like blow everything up and do it from scratch. Whereas this is a case where it's just been kind of added and extended the value of an application, which I think is pretty cool. Hopefully people take this idea in other places, because I think that's a lot of what's going on in application development is going to start to show up in other, from other vendors and other platforms. And, AWS won't be alone here, but certainly this was something that was pretty innovative.
I actually, right now, I'm in Miami for Adobe Max. And one of the big things that has been discussed for, the past year plus is that content velocity. And sports teams, we've heard about this from IBM with Wimbledon, with most recently the US Open, that AI is really helping with content velocity. It used to be that they could only do match summaries for the major events. Now they can do match summaries for all of the singles events. So AI is really helping with that content velocity, and it's definitely something we're talking about a lot here at Adobe Max as well. You guys also mentioned Amazon's Just Walkout technology, a little bit different in terms of how that affects not necessarily the game, but the fans. I find that really interesting, and I actually wrote about that. They do have one Just Walkout technology at Globe Life Field, which is where the MLB All-Star game was held. And there's kind of a couple of different ways that technology is used. One is for like grabbing drinks and snacks and stuff. And that's really important for fans because when you want to get up and go grab something, you don't want to miss any part of the game. You pay a lot of money for those tickets, and it could be like any moment that you might miss, like that game-changing play. And so
Yeah.
people want to get in and out. The other part that Amazon has been focusing on more recently is merchandise. So they're really able to, you don't want to go and like go to try to get your favorite jersey and it's not there. So they're able to track the merchandise by knowing what's come in and out, what's left the store. So it's not just a matter of like, oh, it's easy to check out because you can just, scan your credit card and walk out, but they're able to keep track of the inventory more accurately. They've got that inventory down, in the bowels of the stadium, and they're able to say like, okay, we're out of size medium, get that up there quickly. That also keeps the fans in their seats longer.
Mhm.
So it really is, it seems like it's kind of one of these novelty technologies, but it really is major to the fan experience in terms of keeping them in their seats.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of what we're seeing now with the AI use cases and stuff around agents and so forth is really around kind of you mentioned velocity or urgency, but it's also kind of stuff that's fairly robotic, right? So having inventory checks is kind of a spreadsheet activity. So not having to have humans keep it in their heads or just kind of running around without purpose. That's a good thing, right? And I think it's the same thing with like video content, right? It's if you're pushing something to say Instagram versus YouTube versus whatever, you want it to be formatted correctly to come across correctly and be on brand, quite honestly. So it does have an impact of velocity, but it's also kind of consistency and quality that's coming into it as well. And in some cases, AI can do that better than people.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
even the data, like you're talking about the efficiency. So the drafts used to be manual. Now they can put together a model, run it against all the players, and then they can capture those players instead of the ones that stand out the most from like the Big 12, 12 or the SEC or
Right.
the larger schools. They can kick it against this model against all players, and then they can say if a guy's had 12 interceptions, they can instantly see that player and then video of those 12 interceptions. And that's fantastic.
Yeah, and then even just scheduling, right? I think she said there what were they saying? Some of the billions of options or billions of different parameters that come into now scheduling for games, and because now football isn't on Sunday, right? It's on. It's like it's only 2 or 3 days off a week now from football, so it's a much more difficult task to figure out not only logistics but also just the schedule, right? So
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
That's actually a good segue to our next topic, which because scheduling now has gone international, and there are games throughout the world. So Cisco, sticking with our NFL topic for today, Cisco announced a partnership with the NFL in their league operations across Brazil, UK, and Germany, and then I think they've added Spain in 2025 to use Cisco's networking and cybersecurity solutions to connect and protect the international games and also the 2025 Madrid game. So Jason, you had some pretty good thoughts on this one.
Well, I think the point, even the point about before with AWS and translation, right? Sports are increasingly becoming international. I mean, we have the World Cup coming here yet again. It's been a 30-year break in 2026, but the NFL, I think, is maybe not quite as far ahead, maybe in terms of internationalization as, say, baseball and maybe even basketball have been, as far as U.S. sports are concerned. So I think it's great the NFL is investing in it and working with great partners. And the thing to think about with it is really the infrastructure component, right? So working with a partner like Cisco is great because, not everybody in Brazil has a, high-speed internet connection to their house or a 75-inch TV in their living room, right? So you're going to see consumption of sports outside of the US on so many more different formats and across so many different types of networks, including just plain old internet. So cybersecurity and extending the reach of secure delivery of content is going to be a big, big deal in those countries. Whereas in the US, it's a little bit more still, through streaming apps and so forth, or NFL.com. It just may not be that situation in those other countries. So as these sports expand, they're starting now, especially digitally, they're having to really figure out not only how they get it out there, but also how they keep it tied down when there's so many different formats out there now.
Yeah, they're putting in, like you said, the cybersecurity and the observability, and there has to be a lot of presence of this. This is a big deal as they go international and global to have the security tighter. And I think the Olympics was a good way to take a look at what they did, because they did a pretty good job, and what's needed for what was faltered. But anyway, this is a good one.
Yeah, sure.
All right, we ready to move on to the next? So this one, Sony and their partnership with the NFL, this is sort of like a combination, I think, of more like kind of a consumer brand, but also they're using, it's not only a consumer brand, but they are using consumer products in a partnership. But then they also have this like Hawkeye technology, which I think probably everybody is familiar with in some way, but maybe doesn't actually understand that is what this thing that is basically like calling where the ball lands on the line, like in tennis or whatever. But also, I think one of the interesting things about this partnership with Sony and the NFL is all of the communication with like the sideline headsets that will be actually starting in 2025. But when you see all these players coming off the bus onto the field or even on the field, they're always wearing these headsets. The cameramen, even actually the cameras, so part of the broadcast, so much of this is powered by Sony. So making this partnership official. And actually, they are becoming the official headphones of the NFL. So this is actually really kind of expanding their sports technology through Hawkeye and then on the field and sideline technology. So I think the Hawkeye technology, this is an interesting thing, and I think could spark a little bit of debate with sort of like the pure sports fans who want the game to just be played. Because if you introduce technology that's going to call every single strike exactly as it is, or every ball exactly as it is, or every offsides or whatever sport we're talking about, it changes the game. And we have had discussions with people who think these athletes train their whole lives to play at this level, and they should get the benefit of the right call. I get that argument. At the same time, there is some fun and some, sort of, it's part of the game that you get a bad call, that you get to challenge the call, and that's part of the reason why that those challenges exist in sports, in my opinion. I have a son who's a pitcher, and believe me, it drives me absolutely crazy when I see a strike and it's called a ball, especially when it turns into a walk. But it's part of the game. People love to get mad at the ump. You know what I mean? So I appreciate the Hawkeye technology, especially when it is for a challenge, but I don't think that I wouldn't appreciate a sporting event that is entirely reffed by AI. How about you guys?
I mean, do you want to use it to disrupt the game or help the game? Does it interfere with the nostalgia or does it help? Like, so for a line management, so is it a first down by an inch or is it not a first down by an inch? I think it works in that scenario. I think for baseball, it does hurt the nostalgia with the balls and strikes. I think in some cases, it does help with extra angles, right? So it gives a different additional camera views that you can't see, and maybe it is needed. But there could be a situation where you throw a flag and you get to use it, like the red flag in football, and you
Yeah.
get 3 per game, and maybe it's used at that moment. But for the soccer World Cup, I think it was a European Cup. There was a ton of offsides. I'm not sure if the technology was used at that point, but something like it was used that it was like a toenail was over the line. It was called offsides. At some point you have to let them play, like you're saying, and I think it disrupts the game. But Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, I think is that what's really slowing the game down is the whole appeals process, right? So if a referee makes a call or a machine makes a call, what's slowing down the game is the fact that somebody's raising their hand and saying, "Hey, this is the wrong call," and it just slows down the entire thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question is that where are you going to put that type of knowledge, right? Like Hawkeye seems to be more focused on the replay booth than on the ground. But all those things change, and there are evidence in other sports that it can happen. Where you could have real time types of judgments made. Baseball comes up a lot with balls and strikes and so forth. I think ultimately I think there's kind of a couple things to think about in addition to it. I lean a little bit more towards in favor of it, but again, in favor of it in so much that it can reduce the number of appeals, which is what kind of makes, for me, the fact that every time a touchdown is scored, they have to call it up to New York doesn't seem to make sense. And it just takes too much. It just slows the game down. And I think some of the sports we have on TV now are too long as it is. So I guess if you can speed the game up somehow, that might be good. But the other thing is that I think about is also how technology has now come into certain sports, particularly like racing sports, whether it's cars or bikes or whatever, how the science and the analytics are coming out of it, and it's really kind of making it harder to enjoy because people aren't taking the types of risks they used to, right? I mean, you're not going to pass. These guys have the analytics in their heads so much that they know they're not going to pass the next car in front of them unless these conditions exist, and nobody's really kind of sticking their neck out. And sometimes that's kind of a bit of a drag, right? I mean, it's kind of become a little too robotic. So, on the one hand, I guess I can see it for some forms of officiating. It's just sometimes I really wish some of the players had less data, so they might, or maybe the coaches had less data and telling the players what to do and let the players play. To your point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. That there are certain things that should be challenged and can be challenged, but if you start to challenge too much, it just becomes like everything
So
starts
yeah,
to drag on.
so the other night at the game, I think I told you this, Robert, but I was telling a couple of the people from AWS that there's a snippet going around online that's the opening credits to Monday Night Football from the 70s. And it's showing this absolute just bloodbath of highlight reel. And then it says underneath in the captions that every single play in that credits is now a penalty in the NFL. So 40 something years later, all the stuff that was a highlight reel is now a penalty, right? And I can appreciate the game, the safety improvements and all these other things, and the fact that, quite frankly, these athletes are so much more athletic and they can move so much faster is why they had to put those rules in place. But it is kind of funny how, looking back, I guess I have a lot of appreciation for, say, my generation or my father's generation who kind of constantly complain that, the games are different. Well, they are, right? They are. The good news is they're safer. The bad news is that maybe some of the excitement or maybe even bloodlust is gone. So that's a bit of a bummer, right?
Well, maybe there needs to be boundaries with this technology. So it's just not.
I don't know what the guardrails would be. Yeah.
Because it's getting out of hand. I think, like Mel, you talked about the balls and strikes with your son's game. I mean, how far do you take it? And,
right.
What do you? So
look at gymnastics or skating. What would you do there? Right. I mean, that's a sport that's 100% judged by human judgment, not ball strikes or crossing a finish line. It's literally, what are you going to do? Put a bunch of cameras on the table, and this model comes from Romania and this model comes from the U.S. What, you put different LLMs now in there? I mean, it's or machine learning models to judge the sport. Like I said, I think there is going to have to be some sort of guardrails, because I think those are two sports, especially, that are like, I don't think they're going to want that.
Yeah, we talked about that during the Olympics, that the breakdancing in the Olympics, like the judging was just so
right
odd, because it's a very subjective thing that you judge. But yeah, I think you talked about racing and the technology that goes into these cars now that allow them to make those judgment calls about whether they're going to pass or not pass. They've actually started to limit what racing teams can put in the cars, because it gives them such an advantage. So I wonder if we'll start to kind of see a little bit of a kind of correction on that. I think in football and in some of these contact sports, it was a safety thing that they had to kind of change some of the rules because of all the head injuries and all of the things.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're over engineering it to the point where it's now just, we might as well be playing a video game, at what point is it no longer a sport?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it too. You're right. I mean, the cars one is funny because some of it is safety, but a lot of it is just aero, right? It's just aerodynamics.
Yeah. You keep like creating these perfect transitions, because you talked about aerodynamics and F1, and Cadence actually works on F1 and aerodynamics, and that's our next topic, except for it's not for F1, although they are very heavily involved in F1. But I spent some time week before last, actually last time I saw you, Jason, in Boston. I was with Cadence in Palo Alto, and so talked a little bit with them for years and their sustainability effort. A year partnership that they have formed with the 49ers to kind of address some of their sustainable operations, both in the stadium. And I think this is really interesting because it really kind of incorporates a lot of the technology, and it's a really great way just to kind of show, one, their commitment to the community and the environment, but also the types of things that Cadence does for its actual customers. So it's all around Sustainable Design Center, design and operations, visualizing the data center design and performance, kind of encouraging that sort of proactive, like software based approach. So I think like the resource utilization planning, all of those things, they're doing this for stadiums. And I think a lot of stadiums, I think, Robert, you've talked about this a little as well, like just the sustainability element throughout stadiums and how important that is. I mean, the footprint, the carbon footprint of a stadium is actually quite massive. And I saw something really cool when I was at the MLB headquarters in New York. They have a room where they have screens up, and one of the screens is all of their servers across every single ballpark, and it shows the temperature of each server in every ballpark. So they're not overcooling each server in the ballparks. They're actually monitoring it and cooling it as they need to. Obviously they're going to have a different sort of cooling mechanism for a ballpark in Texas versus a ballpark in Minnesota at different times of the year. So those types of sustainability efforts are so important in these stadiums. Think about like everything that goes into that in
Oh yeah.
waste in, I mean, even ticketing. I mean, think about like the transitioning to mobile tickets, like the paper
Yep.
waste that eliminates. I know there are a lot of people that are really disappointed about not having paper tickets anymore because people like that, the nostalgia of saving their tickets. But the paper waste and things like that, I think that there's something really important about kind of thinking about that,
Well,
everything that you can do within the stadium to kind of save that, and looking at where are the places that we can.
I think sustainability is a big topic, specifically going into 2025 with all types of applications, enterprises with whatever they do. So specifically with these stadiums, there needs to be a practice for, end-to-end carbon footprint, and it's the sourcing, like you said, of the products that they're bringing in. It's the operational processes, it's the transportation to and from, it's the waste management affecting all the departments, suppliers, employees, customers. This is a practice that's, whether companies or facilities are ready, they're going to need to be ready, because I think it's just a gigantic topic going forward. So it's a great partnership that they are putting in place here.
Yeah, they have some other really cool partnerships in place too for just some community efforts and everything, which I love to see stuff like that. But this not really what we're talking about. I think we could do a whole other thing on NFL and their community partnerships. And let me tell you a little something about myself. A long, long time ago, well, it wasn't that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was given an honor by the NFL as a community quarterback for some work that I was doing in the community in San Diego for fostering youth sports in underprivileged communities. So something I'm very proud of. And that just came up when we were talking about community. So I wasn't planning on talking about that, but it's just, something that was kind of cool
Nice
to
job.
receive.
Yeah, very cool.
Great. Yeah. So, well, I think that wraps it up. But this was a great conversation. I think focusing kind of on one sport, there's probably 50 other things we could talk about. I'm so interested in like how they isolate sound. I talked a little bit about that with the MLB. I feel like we maybe should make this a little bit of a series and pick like 4 or 5 things each time, because we have a lot more football over the next few months. So, and actually we have a lot more baseball, even though the Padres are out. So boo for that. But
it was a good series though.
It was. Well. Yeah. So. Well, thank you guys for joining. Thanks for all of your insights. And thank you everybody for watching. If there's anything that you'd like us to talk about on a next episode, please hit us up on Twitter. Please hit the subscribe button and join us each time as we talk about all the different technologies in sports. And thanks again for joining, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.